Hey, welcome to The Breakdown. Today I'm talking with Marc Binkley, co-host of the Sleeping Barber podcast, founder of Quatico, and president of the CMA. I'm looking forward to catching up. Let's get started. Hey, Marc, how's it going?
I'm excited.
Yeah.
Thanks for the invite to do this. I'm really excited to chat with you about this.
Yeah, me too. I feel like it's long overdue, and it's nice to, I find these episodes kind of a nice way to catch up in general. So even though we're recording it, it is nice to talk to an old friend. And, you and I were chatting a little while ago, and you brought up this MIT study. I was thinking maybe we could start there.
Yeah, so the big punchline on that one is that of all the companies they looked at that were implementing AI, they found that 95% of them had zero return. It's crazy.
That's crazy. Implementing as in they are building systems in AI?
Yeah, they like company gets approval to roll out AI into whatever the thing is that they're going to roll it out into. There's a corporate or enterprise-wide initiative to start a project. And so it's the projects themselves that they roll out. Very few of them actually show any meaningful return.
Right.
It's just an interesting thing because it's, I think, indicative of where we are right now with AI in terms of implementation, in terms of adoption. Like a lot of people are really excited about it, me included. And yet when we're given the opportunity to do something with it, where most of us are feeling kind of underwhelmed by it. And in some cases, it's overwhelming because it's not making our lives any easier in the way that people think they will.
There was a study we did with Stone Olafson on this where I can't remember the stats came back, but it was very similar, whereas there's lots and lots of people using AI, but not a lot of people really seeing the benefit or understanding their kind of economics around it. For lack of
I
a
read
better
that. It's a
word,
good
right?
study.
And I think there's a lot of pressure.
It's really good.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I'd take credit, but I had very little to do with it. That was all Stone Olafson. We're just busy beating our chests with it. But I did find that it seems universal that there's a lot of pressure on everybody to be adopting this stuff. And do you figure that's coming from social mostly? That's where I'm getting
I think so.
from.
I mean, it's kind of the same thing. Like it's a really common story in general. Like it is the death of the old way of doing things. It's the most radical transformation since the last most radical transformation. There's a whole digital transformation thing that happened a couple of years ago. And then the social revolution before that, the intention economy. And there's just, if you go back even further, TV was going to kill print or radio. There's every time there's a new technology, I think there's that adoption curve where there's a lot of hype early on. And it's usually created, I think, a lot of times just because it's so new and so exciting and a lot of people generate a lot of buzz around it. Certainly a lot of the S&P, like I think I heard yesterday that it was something around 35% of the total value of the S&P 500 comes from the top 7 companies, which are all like NVIDIA, Google, Meta, Microsoft, like Amazon, giant companies doing a lot of stuff with AI. And they're making a lot of money by selling each other a lot of stuff right now. And so there's a lot of hype around it. But then it gets to you and I, and what do we like? I know you did some really cool projects or implementations trying to make to get to zero inbox as an example. I know was one of the things.
Yeah, I find here's my take on it lately is just going for little wins rather than trying to overhaul your enterprise software. Is just find those little pieces that have been an annoyance and trying to get them out of the way, because I worry that because of the way things are changing so much, it's hard to put your flag in the sand on any one piece of technology at the moment. So if you're trying to, let's say, rip out your operating system and put in something like this, I'd be scared to death to do that just because A, no one's really got the security figured out, and B, there's something 2 weeks from now that might change everything. So it's just easier to get quick wins, and that's where we've
found it's complicated. Like I spent, it had to have been, I think I started on April 1st, and I spent a solid 3 weeks, just nights, weekends, like obsessing about building agents. And I've been using projects a lot in Claude and in ChatGPT and in Gemini Gems. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go all in on this Claude thing. I leveled up and got the big max subscription and start figuring out this Claude Code thing. And then after 3 weeks, probably 50 or 60 hours worth of work, I asked Claude, I'm like, what are we doing? Like, it feels like this is not working. It's not doing as much. And then Claude's like, yeah, you're better off going back to what we had before. It doesn't make any sense. I'm like,
Oh,
oh, okay, great. So we just start from scratch again.
I like how
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
positive
You
about
know, you're
bad
right.
news, hey? It's
I
just
should have
like, you're
caught that
right, you're
earlier.
right. Yeah, I agree. I wonder because you see the kind of adoption curve that usually happens, the big trend, and then it levels out. It just feels like this one's taking a little longer because it's
Yeah.
such a big
Yeah.
thing, I think.
There's a lot
But
of free usage on all the different platforms that I've seen. There's a recent report
right,
from the Ehrenberg Bass Institute on they're looking at double jeopardy law, marketing law, not the movie one, on whether like the loyalty is
right.
falls in the same patterns they've seen in other industries and like from aviation fuel to toothpaste in China, and it does. What was shocking to me about that one is that Claude is so low on the adoption curve, but everything I look at is 100%
Really?
Claude, and I'm in my own bubble. Like my
Right.
feeds are all adapting to Claude because I'm using Claude so much. So I think that most people use Claude, but that's just because it's me seeing that I'm using Claude and everyone I'm talking to is using Claude, and all the people I'm interested in talking to right now are using Claude Cowork and they have ideas on it. And so like it's feeding all the algorithms are feeding that back to me. So the reality is most people are just using free tools. Most people are using ChatGPT or Gemini and not really in
Ah,
that space of
interesting.
building out agents and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm. I you and I had also talked a little bit about this
Hmm.
concept of sea of sameness. Do you mind just
Yeah,
describing
totally.
that a
Like
little bit?
I've been really fascinated in AI and trying to figure out where it helps and why it helps and like to get around this, why 95% of implementations get zero return. So I've interviewed a lot of people around this, yourself included, and I've interviewed some people from like the big holding company agencies and Roger Martin. I talked to him, a couple guys, or Peter Weinberg from Evidenza. I've had a pretty interesting perspective, like because I'm trying to write these articles for work on AI and what it's doing and the best ways to use it and stuff like that. But the sea of sameness thing kind of came from an aha from Roger Martin. And we all seen this, but like the way he described it is that it's optimizing towards the mode. So it's not
Mm,
it's this kind of center point of the herd of answers that are out there. And so AI tools like Claude and like Claude 4.7 got the highest ever score up until 2 weeks ago. I think it was when ChatGPT released their new release. And it's the score is on
yeah.
the GDP Val score. And what the GDP Val score does is it scores the ability of these tools to do knowledge work. And they look at, I believe it's 77 different individual professional services jobs. And they go, how well does it do like accounting kind of work? Or how well does it do marketing kind of work? How well does it do copywriting kind of work or legal work or like across the spectrum of 77 different industries?
Hmm.
And so it scores the equivalent of what a 14-year veteran would get in any one of those categories, which is kind of crazy when you think
Huh.
about it has all of
Jeez.
the knowledge, but it optimizes to the mode,
Yeah.
the middle, because it's trying to be appealing and it's trying to get us to use it. So that's why it says things like good catch.
Right.
And I actually did this on 3 of the different platforms at one point. I was like, why do you keep saying things like good catch or I should have thought about it. Or you're absolutely right. And then the reason, and if you do this enough times and ask whatever tool you're using, it eventually will come around to saying, oh, it's because I'm optimized to being agreeable, not correct. And so it picks the mode because it's the closest thing that it thinks it can get to that is an agreeable answer. And that's exactly why it says things like if you say to it, any of the LLM tools, guess a number between 1 and 10. The first number will come up with
Mm.
7. The second number, I think I'm getting the sequencing right, but it'll be 9, and the third number will be 3, and then it'll be 1. And the reason for that is because that's the mode of what most people pick when it's not actually a random number, but it's a very agreeable number, and it sounds like something that's random, but it's not.
Yeah, it's interesting. You always have to think about at the end of the
Right.
day, it's a prediction machine, right? And it's trained on a pile of data that, and if you know where the sources are, right, you can get a sense of. I remember there's a fellow I know that everything he was generating, at the end of it, it kept saying, "Thanks for tuning
Mm.
in," and he's like, "I didn't ask you to do that. Why does that keep coming up?" And it's like, I think this was Gemini was doing it to him, and he's like, he figured it out is because it was
Oh,
trained on YouTube, and a
smash
lot
that
of
like
the
button.
transcripts would end off with, yeah, yeah, totally. So it's just a good reminder. And the other thing, I follow this one guy. He's really funny. He's super deadpan, but he'll just try and trick AI into doing stuff or lying or contradicting itself. And he made this song where all he did was just make a bunch of fart noises. And he's like, "What do you think of my song?" And it's like, "Yeah, you've really found like a new genre. You've really uncovered something that's, unique and niche." And every time that I'm thinking of doing strategy work, I have that in the back of my head. I'm like, it
Hmm.
did that to the fart song. So if it's like saying I'm super smart right now, I really
Hmm.
can't trust
Yeah.
it to some degree.
Yeah, it's true. And I
Yeah.
think that's the thing where you get it. The machines themselves are confirming biases first because it sounds agreeable. And we like things that agree with us. So it's
Yeah.
not like if you think about their objective, which is to get people to use the tools, because that's how they eventually make money, then they're not going to optimize for providing conflicting evidence or data about who you are. That was actually one of the responses I got. If it was something like, I think it was from ChatGPT, it was something like if there were two people in a research group and one was, questioning you on the methodology and the results, I'd be the one that would say, "Yeah, that's great, keep going." I'd be the one cheering you on. And so it's just a thing. It's pushing us to believe more of the things we that sound right to us.
Right, which is part of that sameness, right? When you are eventually, if everyone's kind of producing stuff
Right.
that's agreeable and in the middle, like you would say, then that might lead into a little bit more of the
Yeah,
value of creativity moving forward, because I think this is getting confused now with what is creativity when you're using these tools. Do you
totally.
find that?
We had a panel last week for the CMA and like it was around stop talking about AI, start making better decisions. And to set up the talk, I had created some images, starting with an image of myself, like a bio headshot kind of thing. And that was the first image, and then I just put it into Nano Banana and said, "Make me an orangutan," and it turned me in an orangutan. And then there was another one that was me surfing, and then me looking like Doctor Strange when he was doing that 14 million choices thing, looking for the future and looking for the answers. So there's all kinds of things you can do with it, but making a piece of creative is not necessarily the same thing as having a good piece of creative. And I think there's a whole bunch of things around
Right.
the strategy behind that and the thinking that needs to be more valued than ever before because anybody can make something, but it doesn't mean that you're making something that's good. And so I think that's part of our role is like to avoid the sea
Yeah.
of sameness is to be the tastemakers.
Yeah, I found that too. This willingness to run with any idea it's got, right? So it'll come up with, here's 3 campaigns. Which one do you want to run with? And if you said
Hmm.
any of them, it would just start. It would
Yeah,
just build out your ads and your PowerPoints and everything, because it has no
totally.
sense of this is good or this is bad. Is
Yeah,
less
we
a
had
taste is what you're
last year we
mentioning,
did
but
a workshop with Carl, was Carl Yave from 0 to 60. And it was a workshop on, we had 15-ish people in the room. And so we divided the room into 3 groups. So one was the vibe marketers. So we gave everybody the same brief. And the vibe marketers just ran with it and they just did the things that AI was telling them to do. And at the end of a 3-hour workshop, everybody's going
right.
to produce creative, and to serve the campaign brief that we had laid out to them. So there's the vibe markers; they just ran with it, and like a couple hours later, they got this ton of cool stuff. None of it on brand that they admitted. It produced charts and all kinds of stuff. They're like, no idea where this information came from. And then the other one was there's another group that was the traditional marketers, and so they were feeding it with prompts, things like using Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the funnel and reference Simon Sinek's Start With Why and come up with creative and to suit the campaign that we have been tasked to produce a result on. And so theirs was interesting too because it looked really good at the end of it. They had a jingle and dance. It was for a fictitious pierogi company. They had dancing pierogies. It was crazy what they could make. And then there's a third group that was an
Yeah.
evidence-based group, and they were there given specific prompts around like category entry points, around using distinctive brand assets, making sure that they were aligning the distinctive brand assets up with the category entry points that initiated purchase cycles and triggers. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff around that they were using, and they also produced some great stuff. But at the end of it, if you were blind to, or not blind, but didn't know the objective
Mhm.
and just were looking at the creative, you would at the end we were like, that's really impressive that everybody made all these things um, in a very short window of time. But nobody had to defend their decisions to an executive room or to a client. And so I think that's where a lot of this would fall down because the vibe markers admittedly said they couldn't justify any of the things that were there, that just they made stuff. Right. And then the traditionalists, I
Mhm.
think you run into the same situation that marketers have been facing all the same for decades, which is they have a hard time justifying the budget and hard time defending brand and a really hard time kind of proving any type of ROI on those kinds of investments. Whereas I think the evidence-based people
Mhm.
would have had a better chance of getting something pushed through, in my opinion. And so, but each one of them went in with somewhat of a bias, and the machines confirmed their bias.
Right. Yeah, you're kind of leading the question, right? I think our creative director, Kurt, I think he talked about this a little while ago, which was a good little phrase. He was saying he feels his job is to help people
Hmm.
make decisions. And in some ways, I think that's true. It's companies
Totally.
are messy by nature, which I think is part of the reason why AI really has a struggle when it's easy to set up a company when you're a person of one and you're using Google as your backbone. But if you are, a 10-year-old company trying to rebrand, and then you need to, like you said, talk in front of a board and talk about, the strength of the brand and how it's going to last for the next 10 years and all that kind of stuff. And if you just generated everything out of ChatGPT, it would be really hard, I think, to convince people to make that change, or at least
Hmm.
stand
Yeah.
behind the work. And that's where I think
Yeah,
this
and so
stuff
like in
falls
the
down a
the
little
vibe
bit.
marketer's case, or there's lots of other examples of this, but there's a great line that shit delivered at the speed of light is still shit. And so it's not just because we have these tools doesn't mean it's helping us solve any problems. It We could just be doing more
Yeah.
of the same faster.
Yeah, I like that. Here's the other thought I've been having. I don't know if you've heard this story. It's an old story, and I wish I knew where it came from, and it could be complete fiction. But it was this thought that um, this group, whatever study group, brought in these creative directors from 3 different areas, and they brought them into this room and gave them a brief. And on the way to this room, they drove them intentionally past a bunch of things like
Yeah.
the zoo and some billboards and stuff. And then when they got them all together, they gave them the brief, and then they all went into separate rooms and tried to crack it. And they all came back and roughly presented the same creative that seemed very out there and whatnot, but it was all based on these like
Hmm.
subconscious cues that they had intentionally planted. Makes me wonder, this is getting a little nebulous, but as you're getting into creativity, it's like we are all a product of our own inputs, right? The
Totally.
books we've read, the movies we've seen, the impressions we've had in our lives, are we limited by that? And is this opening that up? Or you're talking to a computer that has
Totally.
all the books and all the movies and all the campaigns available to it. Maybe it comes down to that
Yeah.
taste or whatnot, but it does make me worry a little bit
Yeah,
on
it
the
does.
creativity
But
side.
I
You know what I
I
mean?
kind of look at it as like limitless possibilities. So going back to the GDP Val score, right? There's 77 different profiles of professionals that they score against. And I'm pretty sure I want to say it's 77, maybe it's 44. But anyways, it's a lot of people that they score the knowledge,
Right.
the ability to deliver knowledge work against. And it's, by the way, it's as good at doing something in seconds that it would take someone 7 hours to do. And that's the score. So that was the reason why I had that picture of Doctor Strange up of my head on Doctor Strange. Because it's that idea of like, there's infinite possibilities. You can run a Monte Carlo simulation in any of these tools to come up with the answer, the one choice, right? That helps you beat Thanos or whatever. Like, you don't have to take the mode answer. because there's all this knowledge out there. And so one of the things that I did early on when I was playing around with all the different tools is I built in the projects, built a council, like a conflict, you can call it a conflict council if you want, but a group of people like I created personas based off of all kinds of people. Like I put Roger Martin in there. I think a lot about him. I put in dead people like Steve Jobs. I put in Sun Tzu. I put in Genghis Khan. This is for my strategic advisory council. But when I do strategy, like I have ideas that I'm talking to Claude about, and then my strategic advisory council chimes in on that. And so I'm trying to create differences of opinions to make me think differently. So their personas are kind of accompanying me in the decision making process. So I'm not just taking Claude's word for it. I'm using some of their input to help me reshift and reevaluate and shine lights on some of the dark spots that I haven't thought about.
No, I love that. So just so everyone understands, how are you putting a personality in as a counsel into AI?
So how I did it originally is a little bit different from how I'm doing it now. And this is my experience with wasting so much time trying to build agents, which isn't really a waste. It's just like, it's just learning.
Yeah, I get it.
But initially, what I did was because in most of these tools, you can load up supporting documents. So I had
Mhm.
Claude or ChatGPT and Gemini, all kind of the things doing the same type of thing, where I would ask them to create basically like a canon of the most famous works from these people in a document. And then I
Mhm.
loaded that document into the supporting documents for that project. And then in the instructions, then I would say, whenever I'm asking questions about this or that, or whatever, however I wanted I articulate the system or the process that I want to take. I want how I want the project to interact with me. Then I would make sure that it would reference my strategic advisory council and give me at least 3 or 4 quotes or perspectives from their work and challenge my thinking to make me better and make the outcome better.
Hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. I've heard of
Yeah,
people doing
same
that
idea.
with boards, right? Yeah, they take everyone's personality and basically bake it into AI, which I'd also feel like, wow, I wonder what it'd be like if anyone read their own,
Yeah,
personality as written by somebody else. But it's a great way to like, hey, how is this presentation going to go over, right? And how do I modify it so that, you know, Dan over
right.
there
Yeah.
doesn't pick it apart
Oh,
as
Dan
usual,
is
right?
always
Or
that
whatever.
guy.
God damn it, Dan. Yeah, that's super cool. I like, and has it worked when you've been
Oh
doing
yeah,
that?
for sure.
Has it gotten you to better
Yeah, because
places?
I mean, it gets to a point where I'm like, and I try and pick the divergent thinkers so they're all the same thinkers. But yeah, like more and more, I kind of reconsider who I would want to have in the board, and I kind of reshuffle it around based on some of the responses I'm getting. But like Einstein is in one of mine. I've got in a creative project that I've got, George Lois is in there. Um, I don't know, just people that I think Picasso is in in the creative one as well. Like just different people with different perspectives that like dead or alive. It doesn't matter because a lot of these people have published ideas and literature and stuff that it knows about. And I'm just formalizing some of the things that I want it to reference when it challenges me. For this article the most recent article I was writing, there was this thing I found. There was a survey that was done asking 1,500 executives what their biggest challenges were. So what came back was balancing short and long term, collaborating across silos, protecting margins in commoditizing industries. These sound familiar, probably, right? The crazy part is that
Yeah.
that
Yep.
survey was done in 2008. So the
Oh,
big problems
geez.
that face our business are still the big problems that have been around for decades. And I think when you look at the usage of things like ChatGPT, there's a study I found that showed that the number one usage at work for ChatGPT is copywriting. So I think some of the things that we've been talking about, like
Right.
challenge groups or advisory boards or whatever you want to call it, and then things like you have access to all the world's information pretty much. You can run Monte Carlo simulations. Like we don't have to trade off solving big challenges, wicked problems with delivering shit today. Like, it can be both, and I think that's kind of an interesting thing.
Right. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Do you find like I've heard this many times is how content is the number one. Do you figure is or writing anyways, creative writing. It just felt like that was the very first example of AI when they first I remember seeing, I don't know how old this was. It's got to be over 10 years of seeing an example of AI writing a blog
Mhm.
post and they'd show it side by side and everyone's jaws dropped. It just feels like the very first initial application of a text-based AI. And then all this other stuff's relatively new. Like you think over the last year, agents just started, I think, within the last
Totally,
year, at
yeah.
least in the public's realm, as far as I remember, right? So all of these updates and stuff, which is going at an exponential rate, like the ability for us to adopt it seems so hard. I read, did you ever
Yeah,
read Sapiens? I can't remember who wrote it. It's a good book, but it was his point was is that from just an evolution point of view, we are still
mhm,
adopting to agriculture. That's how slowly we're gradually getting into things versus tech is so far beyond us. And the rate that this is coming out right now, where it used to take us like
totally.
TVs came out, it took us like 40 years to really get TVs going in our rooms. Now we have
Yeah.
something coming out almost every day. I just don't believe we can, to your point around, this isn't an effective tool for a lot of people. I just don't think we know how to get into this stuff that
Yeah, I
quickly. It's
agree,
just
and
so
I think
fast.
if you look at the digital media landscape, I would say 2012, just to mark a moment in time, that's when Facebook went public. That's when I really got heavily involved in digital media, social media, probably around that time, a little bit before that, or actually, but anyway, that's
Right.
just a good marker. And so here we are, help me out with the math, but I think 15-ish plus years later, and it's now taken over
Right.
digital has now taken over traditional in terms of total ad spend. Like if you look at e-marketer charts and that kind of stuff, right? Like the dollars spent, like for
Hmm.
every dollar, more than half is now going to digital platforms. But that took 15 years at least.
Right. I remember that. Yeah. I remember it creeping up and they were like,
Yeah.
it's never going to be
So,
more.
for all the
Right.
hype though
Yeah.
around how everyone's doing social, you got to be on social, and like I was at conferences where that was a thing, and it's true, and it's not to say that it's not important to understand. I think AI is going to be amazing for a lot of companies to do this, dangerous but also amazing, like same kind of thing, double edged sword. Um, but it's still going to take people are people. It's still going to take a long time to get used to it and figure out how to use it, and especially organizations. I think why agents are so hard, my experience with don't think I'm that unique. Maybe I just suck, but but maybe everyone else figured it out on the first time. But it's really hard to explain what we do. Like I think we take that for granted. And it's like we wanted to do
Yeah.
all these things so quickly, but you realize quickly that there's a lot more nuance and a lot more that comes into what we do. And you have to think about what you do in a way that is not natural because we're just so used to doing it.
Yeah. That's been my experience. This agent building is relatively simple, but it's coming up with all the business rules and the strategy around what you're trying to build and how it's going to work with your own messy background
Yeah,
that makes it tough, right? So, yeah, I get it. And I think that's the disconnect right now that's going on. It's just everything's simple and should be automated and you're falling behind and you're missing out. And then there's a reality where everyone's like, yeah, this doesn't work for me. My company doesn't work like that. We got a
totally.
million other variables here, but we're all buying subscriptions and everyone's working on it.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I
it's
think
a
where it
bit of
gets even
chaos.
more complicated is if you start thinking about the organizational way you do things, like that kind of thing, that becomes even more difficult to codify because that can change from one
Yeah.
department to the next or one manager to the next. And so if you're trying to produce something that's
Yeah.
consistently good, you could do that at an individual level maybe, but then at a departmental level or a corporate level, it becomes harder. And so I think there's a whole bunch of thinking around decoding how businesses function that will face a lot of opposition because then you're asking people to give up their secrets. How do you do stuff? And then you'll end up finding that a lot of people
Right.
won't want to share that because that's the special sauce that is what makes them not expendable.
Right. Yeah. Can you break down what you do exactly and put it into a
Right.
document so that we
I've
can
seen
get
this
rid of
movie
you?
before. Wait a sec.
Wait a minute. Yeah, I hear you. Okay. Well, Mark,
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming on. I feel like we could probably chat for a couple hours at least. In fact, the next one I booked you in for about 9 hours, but this one, unfortunately, we got to wrap up. So thank you. And I just you also have your own podcast, Sleeping Barber, right? So I'll stick that in the show notes as a link.
Yeah, we're going to be going back to Cannes this year, actually, as media to cover the festival. So that'll be a lot of fun. We got a lot of great interviews lined up, and we just have actually published a lot of great interviews this year. So yeah, it's a lot of good things happening with that one too.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Mark. And
thanks, man.
We'll have to get you back. Thanks again.
Yeah, that was great. That was a lot of fun.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss another episode. Want to stay up to date on AI on a weekly basis? Get in on our newsletter at artificialbreakdown.com. Stay charged out there.